Hello viewers, welcome back. I have to say, of all the shows that came out last year, Kiznaiver was one of the ones I was most excited for. I seem to remember a lot of other people being excited for it too. What I don't remember is hearing much about it after it started airing. I suppose this is good and bad. While this means that I didn't hear anyone confirming that it was good, it also means I didn't hear a barrage of people saying it was disappointing either. I suppose it must have just been swallowed up by all the other shows that came out around the same time. In any case, I was glad to finally get around to watching it myself. The story follows 7 kids who are kidnapped on their first day of summer vacation and injected with a drug that bonds them all to each other, so when one feels pain, they all feel it, and people connected this way are known as Kiznaivers. This story is very character-driven, so I can't really go any farther without introducing them. First is Katsuhira. He's special because he's unable to feel pain, or any emotion at all. He's also missing a good chunk of his childhood memories, though he's recently started having cryptic dreams of a girl telling him there is a way for him to get his pain back. Katsuhira is supposed to be our main protagonist, but the series does a really good job of making all the Kiznaivers almost equally important. Though I suppose they'd have to be, given that the whole show revolves around their bond. Next is Chidori, Katsuhira's childhood friend. From his regular childhood, not the one he can't remember. Honestly, they're not too clear about when she came into his life, though she does say she knew him before he became numb to everything. Anyway, Chidori is described as the goody two-shoes, but it's not so much that she always does the right thing, just that she's always putting everyone else first. She's quick to apologize and consider everyone else's feelings, even when they're not nearly as considerate of her. She wears her heart on her sleeve and has an obvious crush on Katsuhira. That only serves to become even more obvious as the series progresses. They would have had an interesting relationship anyway, because they're the only two who were connected before becoming part of the Kizna project. Then there's Tenga. Loud and hot-headed. I wouldn't say he's truly dumb, but his first reaction to any problem is to try and solve it with his fists rather than logic or compromise. He's not unfriendly, just eager to uphold his reputation as the tough guy. Yuta is your prince type with a dark side. Like if Yuki Soma had secretly been a selfish, superficial jerk, this would be the result. We learn early on that Yuta used to be really overweight as a child. He has since hit the other extreme, and now appearances are all that matter to him. He seems to enjoy having the girls in their class fawn over him, and acts fairly charming in general, but he has no problem being cold towards the other Kiznaivers, who he views as an assorted group of freaks and losers, not really worth knowing. But even Yuta's not the coldest one in the group. That distinction goes to Maki, who's extremely distant and reserved. She's the most resistant to the idea of being bonded to 6 other people, but it's because of this that the show became as heartfelt and sweet in places as it did. She's got a bit of a tragic backstory, and her distance is eventually what pushes the other Kiznaivers together to try and warm her up to the idea of having friends again. Nico is probably the most memorable character. She's loud, in many definitions of the word, and cheerful. She's described as the eccentric head case, and that's probably all I really need to say on the subject. But we are given the impression early on that, like Yuta, she's very aware of how she comes across to others, and may be doing quite a bit of it for attention. There was something genuine and earnest about her, though. She's the most invested in them all being friends, because she's never had any before, and it was hard not to be moved by that. Lastly, of the 7 anyway, is Hisomu. He's an interesting case. Hisomu wasn't with the original 6. He didn't have to be kidnapped. He volunteered himself for the project. I plan to come back to him when I discuss the story, so those are the 7 Kiznaivers, but there is one more important character. Noriko is another one of their classmates, but she's working with the adults in charge of the project. She explains to them that their entire city was originally created for the purpose of carrying out this experiment. And what is the purpose of the Kizna experiment? World peace, of course. On the basis that if everyone could truly understand everyone else's pain, there would be no more fighting in the world. A little too simple and bland, I know, but we'll come back to that too. If you were wondering where I got the descriptions for some of the characters, that comes from Noriko too. She originally matched them up to the 7 deadly sins, but she's the first to admit that they're not perfect examples of those, so I just like to go with their much simpler explanation. That these 7 were chosen based on their personalities, because they're a group of people who wouldn't typically get along. I found, though, that for a group of characters who all should have seemed annoying or irritating for one reason or another, I found them all to be pretty likable. Maybe not at first, but all 7 do eventually get their chance to shine. And frankly, Kiznaiver was right up my alley in the sense that I love stories like this, where a diverse group of characters are forced together and have to learn to work together and get along, dating all the way back to my Digimon years. Kiznaiver had one of those stories that had the potential to either be really good or really bad. I've already mentioned that the driving goal behind the plot is a little weak, but I still thought it was an interesting idea, although they do immediately lower the stakes a little. The kids are, more or less, allowed to go about their normal lives. They just have to complete a set of objectives, missions if you will, and they'll be released from their connection at the end of the summer. Eventually, the stakes are hiked back up. The 7 are surprisingly successful, getting better results than even the researchers expected, and they start feeling the others' emotions during really intense moments too. But it only gets to be too much once they start hearing each other's thoughts. By this point, they've been established as friends, and there's a really emotional scene where they come to the conclusion that they're now too close, and they'll start to tear each other apart if they spend any more time together, so they go their separate ways. The story was of interest to me because there were so many possible places they could have taken it. They chose to go the route of increasingly intensifying their Kizna connection, but I feel like there was a lot that could have been done with just sharing physical pain. For example, Hisomu's quirk is that he's a masochist. Not in the angsty, I deserve to feel pain because I'm a bad person sort of way, but in the derive sexual pleasure from pain sort of way. And just like that, the one character who had the most potential to be really sinister became comic relief. Not that I'm complaining. I've already said that I came to really like all of the characters, but I was originally expecting Hisomu to be more of a game changer, actively trying to hurt the other characters. We're spared from that with the excuse that he thinks pain is best when it comes as a surprise, and that's just one possible change. I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to discuss the ending, mostly because it's very centered on Noriko and I never got that attached to her, but I do want to go over this series as a whole, so if you were trying to avoid any of the major spoilers, this is the place to stop. If you're going to continue on, well, Katsuhira realizes that the girl in his dreams is Noriko and eventually uncovers his forgotten childhood. He and Noriko were part of the original Kiznaiver experiment along with 17 other kids. The idea was to split the pain as many ways as possible, but it didn't work that way. Rather than sharing it equally, Noriko started feeling the pain of 19 people all by herself. This left the other kids numb, like Katsuhira was at the beginning of the series, and for some it was so bad that they're basically living in a vegetative state. Noriko herself has to be numbed with medicine just to function, and she's become desperate for the Kiznaiver experiment to work, which is losing popularity with their financial sponsors. So she basically goes off the deep end and tries to forcibly connect the whole city, and it's up to Katsuhira and his new friends to convince her she's going about it the wrong way. And if I don't exactly sound thrilled about this, it's because I'm not a huge fan of the way Kiznaiver ended. I just didn't really care about Noriko, and there was a bit of a logic hole in her motivations. Namely, that she shouldn't really have them to begin with. If Noriko was truly as incapable of feeling anything as they claimed, she shouldn't have cared that she was unable to care. I would have much rather preferred the finale revolve more around the other 7. Although they did get a few really good moments that helped redeem the ending a bit. The first one was that, well, Noriko's craziness is what brings them back together, but the other 6 all agree that they don't really care about her either. They're going to do whatever they can to help because they're Katsuhira's friends, and he cares about her. And the second was the little speech Maki makes to try and knock some sense into Noriko. She basically tells her that this forced, manufactured empathy the Kiznaiver project is trying to create is too shallow to hold up in the real world, that it's because they have to struggle to understand each other's pain that makes their friendship meaningful. And it's because it was Maki, who was the most resistant to this whole thing, that this speech was as powerful as it was. Every show has its flaws, but as I'm sure you can tell from what became a much longer review than I'd intended, I did really like Kiznaiver. The animation was sometimes a little too loose for my tastes, but the music was good and I loved the opening. This is a show that could have really sweet, emotional moments, genuinely eerie moments, and really funny moments all in the same episode. I'd almost accuse the writers of trying to do too much, except for the most part, it worked. These scenes could all hit their mark without feeling out of place. The story is interesting in that I did like what they did with it, overall, but there were so many other ways it could have played out. What Kiznaiver needs is not a sequel or more episodes, but the chance to be done from scratch, potentially over and over again. Not because this version was bad, but because I'd love to see all the different directions they could have taken this story, and it's just not possible to showcase them all in one cohesive narrative. Its strongest point, for me, will always be the characters. They took a group of characters who shouldn't have been all that likable and gave them a depth I wasn't expecting, so I loved it, and I suggest you go check it out too if you haven't already. Thank you for watching.